Hallo Freunde, willkommen zurück zu .NET API Review. Wir haben viele Themen heute. Ja, heute. Um, yeah, eh, still a little disorganized. We're back to a point where we have to scroll the list. Once again, we'll see how much we can burn through in a day. Um, at some point, we might have to pick up a second one in a week to catch up, but hopefully not. All right. First off, raise the app domain unhandled exception event for exceptions outside the runtime 102730. Aaron, you're up. And muted.
Yep. So this is a hopefully a pretty simple review issue. Uh, this is primarily for our historically mono targeted platforms. So you can imagine iOS or Android. This is when .NET really doesn't own the process. And so what can happen, and this is in those particular scenarios, the application is really an, let's just say, Objective-C or a Swift application, and the .NET runtime is living within it. It is the primary application, but it does not start the process. It is activated after the process is started. And so on iOS, that's Swift or Objective-C. On Android, that is the JVM or a Java process. And so because that we don't necessarily own the process, we are typically doing an immense amount of interop. And so we're calling back into the JVM, or we're calling back into the Objective-C or Swift runtime, and then things are happening there. And what potentially can happen is an exception bubbles up through some API. And if, let's say it's on the main thread, or main thread's probably not a great example, but a background thread, and it bubbles up into the JVM or into this Objective-C. It bubbles outside of .NET. There is no way for the application, which is typically just written in C# and would have registered unhandled exception, to get that unhandled exception, because it's being handled by the enclosing runtime, whether that's a JVM or Objective-C or Swift process. And so the application writer went out of their way to say, well, I want to handle all unhandled exceptions. But it does not manifest through the runtime's exception handling routine. And so what this API is requesting is, in those particular scenarios, the interop, the framework for that application, the iOS interop or Swift interop or Android interop, needs to say, all right, we've detected this case. It is on a Java-owned thread that was running managed code, yes, but it was detected, and the application is about to go down. But they want a way to tell the classic .NET handler, hey, fire, and do your thing. Typically, this is creating a bunch of logs, emitting a bunch of telemetry. Doesn't really matter, but from the application developer's perspective, they subscribe to the unhandled exception, and now they are expecting that to be called when one occurs. And so this is really about providing an API that Mono has, where those runtimes can call into it and say, just trigger these handlers and return to us. And the reason they want to return is because typically you want the enclosing runtime to perform whatever cleanup it needs to do. Whether for Android, it will register with the Android operating system and say, record any information that you need and propagate it to the appropriate store or app or service that the Android ecosystem has. And so you can look up your application crashed and it looks natural. But from the .NET perspective, we also need this handler. Applications may send their own telemetry, they may do their own thing. And this is really just providing an API that allows symmetry with the existing Mono API and is managed, and it allows them to trigger those.
Do the handlers run in line on the calling thread, or is it dispatched?
It would be great. They will run on that thread. We're not spinning up a new thread for them to run. They will be run. The calling raise is the thread that will execute those handlers.
So
there was a
go ahead, Steph.
there was a question of currently I have exception on there. Jan Kotis pointed out that other .NET languages don't necessarily require you to inherit from exception. So his point was, and to be clear, the unhandled exception arguments type, the exception object is typed as object. It's not typed as exception. So his suggestion was that we change the type from exception to, change the signature from exception to object as well. I didn't update that here.
Do we really care about non-exception exceptions?
These APIs are callable from other platforms. These APIs are called from other languages.
Just seems kind of weird. And like, do other languages actually use non-exception types for exceptions? And like, would they actually want to call this API with like a plain object? Or
it's all fair questions. I don't know. I mean, typically we would make the primary argument here is the unhandled exception handlers that you can provide, that you can register, treat the object as an opaque object type, not as an explicit exception. So matching that was kind of the I think the primary point.
Whether that resonates with you. Yeah, it resonates with me. So the exception object is object on the unhandled exception event arc.
Yeah, so if you scroll down in the API usage, you can see the exception object there. That is actual object. That's why I'm casting it.
Object. So Aaron, I'm slightly confused.
Sure.
Because as far as I can tell, we don't have a class called exception handling in the exception services namespace.
Did I put it in the wrong spot?
Which means you can't be adding a method to it.
It was added last. Really? Am I missing something?
I see it on source.net in corelib. Oh wait, system runtime exception services. Yeah.
Oh, maybe I put the namespace incorrectly?
That seems like what you wrote.
I mean, is it so new that API Cat doesn't know about it?
It's possible.
Is it newer than March?
I dropped a link in the chat.
You act like I can see those.
So if you go to the top of the issue, there is a link for utilities from that one. Yeah. And this was partially completed, is not fully completed. And so this is where that type was introduced.
Okay. Now, if it was partially completed, I wonder if that meant didn't update the reference assembly, so it's not callable outside the platform.
No, it was in the reference assembly, if I recall, because I've more or less implemented this as I've described it. But I updated the exception handling Class. Maybe it's not there.
Yeah, like it hasn't bubbled out to the doc site. Um, does it appear in a ref anywhere? Yeah, like I don't think it was ever added to the ref.
So, okay, that's if we look at the PR that I have, I did add it to it, but maybe it hasn't made it farther.
You
Not
have
PR. If you look at the branch that I have in that issue,
the older one or the new one.
I'll just put this in the chat.
Okay.
Uh,
You act like I'm smart enough to figure things out.
so there's the branch for it. In that branch, I am updating a ref assembly, which has the thing. Maybe I updated the wrong one, but I don't think so.
I won't search on a branch.
Well, if you go to three commits ahead of, oh, there yeah, that one. And then there's a system.runtime.cs is there. So.
Yeah. So what's it look like in main? I mean, we can move on from this.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, yeah, all right. I see it in there in main, but it wasn't showing up on API Cat, and it's not on the doc site, so it must be either new or ingestion's broken.
It was, it is relatively new. I don't know if it made it into 9. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, I was just making sure we were in the right place. Do we have other raises?
Yeah, we chose raise. Originally, the proposal was for trigger. I think Jan did some scrounging around, and in the guidelines it says do use the term raise for events rather than fire or trigger. So I think that's where we went through. Prior art is raise property changing and raise deserialization event.
Fair enough. Because yeah, I think normally, or the guideline about call it raise, I think is supposed to be like the protected method that triggers the event off of a type, or instance, I guess. This one being a sort of like someone from the ether just says, "We're doing this now." And then there's nothing in this that actually forces the application to shut down or forces the notion that the exception was actually unhandled. This is just when you're doing an interop bridging story, you should do this to play nicely, but you could also be super weird and do this for every exception thrown from Java in an Android mount.
Yes, you could.
And then the idea is that this is supposed to be unhandled exception. What we would do with an unhandled exception that came through the CLR is we would fire the event, we would raise the event, and then terminate the process. And so the expectation is as the interop code is unwinding, that it's going to have a bit set somewhere that says it needs to move the process into terminated state.
That last part I didn't get.
Or are they? Or is somebody supposed to call fail fast right after this line?
No. So that is possible. I believe that is what Android, iOS presently does. That is not what Android does. So I think it's kind of dependent on how the interop system is defined. The reason the reason Android doesn't is because they want to let the exception continue to bubble up to the appropriate runtime so that the ecosystem's natural unhandled exception logic can take over and follow whatever telemetry or whatever that happens, because we can't continue from this, because if you're calling this, the expectation is the next thing is you pass it off to the operating system or the underlying runtime that owns the process, and ostensibly they're going to terminate the process. iOS takes a slightly different perspective, and they call this and then they just call abort. But there is nothing enforcing this. You are correct in the sense that, yeah, someone could just call this and start triggering that handler, and all sorts of weird unexpected behavior could result.
Right. And so you mentioned the sort of, I guess, an Android process, meaning you started in Android and Java, and then you've hosted the CLR, and then now you've done a pinvoke and done something. And it's classifying this exception that it's seeing as unhandled, but that just means it can't be handled without terminating the .NET hosting. Because it could be caught by the thing that's hosting the .NET runtime.
Yes. So typically the use case here would be the Android runtime would subscribe to the enclosing runtime's unhandled exception logic, and this would be the forward to us. Those handlers would call, and then it would return to that and say, proceed.
Right. But it is still it's not the notion that it says, wait, I can see that this would terminate the process because no one's going to handle it. It's just saying, I need to throw this through the interop layer so far that we should just tell .NET it's dead. Where then the caller may then handle it and spin .NET back up or whatever. But
sure.
But okay, I'm just talking it through, making sure that when we're calling it unhandled, we're not being like, well, there's this super common case that will actually be handled exceptions that aren't fitting the name. So
no, this was specifically asked for from the iOS team and the Android team, specifically for they have subscribed to the outer process's unhandled exception logic, and the process is terminating, and users want a final callback to say, do something, telemetry or crash report or whatever.
And the implementation of this is essentially just appdomain.unhandledexception.invoke.
Basically,
so fire
you fire all of them. We make sure that exceptions don't bubble out.
Yes, we do the things we do on multicast delegates, and
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Note that the one just at present, two things I think are worthy of noting. The default is terminating on the unhandled exception event args. That will always be true with this. And the other one is in the current implementation, and I'm not calling this out, but I can. This does not integrate with the existing debugger logic. iCore debug has certain callbacks that say unhandled exception. This is not doing that. This is doing exactly what you stated about. It's just calling the handlers. That's all we're doing at present. No one's asking for the other support because we're just following what Mono's implementation does today.
Yeah. So you mentioned is terminating. Instead of changing the parameter to object, should we just change it to unhandled exception event args? So then, if for some reason Android wanted to raise one with his terminating as false, they could, without us adding a new API?
I don't see why that would be difficult. I don't see why that would be a problem.
And then unhandled exception event args, that was a weird place to put stress, but whatever. It takes object, which means we don't have to decide, do we care about typed objects versus untyped objects. We're just throwing you give us the thing and we'll pass it to the event handler.
I I don't see anything obviously wrong with that.
Because
I
it doesn't
think
it doesn't gain a call stack from the runtime, or like it's just a tuple of object and boolean. So it that feels like actually the natural parameter for this method.
I don't have any issue with that. That would work. I have no pushback on that.
Like it's slightly more work on the caller, but eh.
Sure.
What do we even call an event args parameter? I haven't used one in so long. E?
Mentorps? Oh yeah, E.
Yeah, it looks like E.
I'm thinking through this, Jeremy. The one thing that I will say is, at present, when the current exception handling infrastructure calls this and triggers it, is terminating is always true. So when we were about to fire this, when we were about to fire this event, and we have an exception, we create this instance currently, and is terminating is always true.
Sorry, you don't mean for this PR? You mean when the runtime is invoking this guy?
Yep.
That is terminating is always true. It's simply a thing someone can set if they choose to invoke it on their own.
Right. So I don't know if that changes your perspective on it. Like manipulating that to be false. I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't. I don't see why that would ever not be false based on our current interpretation of unhandled exception. Other than the fact that the general concern is anybody can call this. So
Just curious to see if we've documented that it's just always true. Because yeah, I actually thought that unhandled, or the is terminating, reported whether it was from a main thread or a background thread, and that a background thread would be false, saying a thread terminated because of this exception, but we don't care. I thought that was the whole point of being called a background thread.
The point of being a background thread is just that it doesn't prevent the app from exiting when the process would normally exit.
Fair enough. Okay. Yep. So I guess I don't care between object exception or unhandled exception event args E. Anyone want to voice a vote?
Event args for flexibility. I don't have a strong preference though.
I think the argument of object is absolutely the right thing to do. So I think it comes down to either object or event args. This is, again, maybe not helpful, but I'll try it. This is for, yes, an advanced interop scenario, and there are single digits of people that will use it.
Yep.
Or that are expected to use it.
Yeah. In our classic docs style, unhandled exception event args is terminating says it's generally true. For cases where it's not true, see a different article which doesn't mention the property. So makes it hard to search for. If it is vanishingly small to the point of being zero that we would ever have is terminating as false, then let's just go with object exception.
Okay.
And if we ever have to come back and add the version that takes the Boolean parameter on this, then we get to just facepalm so hard.
Agreed.
And I guess let's just double check that object exception is what we call it in unhandled exception event args. It is. Excellent. All right. Any other feedback on a thing that I doghoused way too much?
I missed the beginning of this. Exception handling is a class we already have.
Yes, I don't know why it's not an API cat. It is in system.runtime refcs.
Huh.
It was recently added last year sometime.
Is this where we put the event itself? Or the unhandled, that thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That was the first. That was the middle 10 minutes of this. Yeah. Was
Okay, cool. I
where
wanted to rehash it.
where is this mysterious type? So.
All right, fine. Sorry, I'll do this, and then I know this is going to cause stress. Can you go back to the API, the other one?
No, too late.
Okay.
Just kidding.
So this is the API that was added. So it says set unhandled exception handler, right? This is a very specific API about do you want to treat this as an unhandled exception or not? That's basically what that does. The unhandled exceptions that we're talking about in this API are only the handlers on appdomain.unhandledException. They are not this API.
Yet they live next to each other on the same type.
And are called the same thing.
Yes.
So, raise unhandled exception. Well, I mean, it does say raise unhandled exception event, and this is set unhandled exception handler.
Right. Sorry. That
It's specifically about the app domain or assembly, whatever it is, dot unhandled.
Yep, appdomain.unhandledException.
Should we just put app domain into the name?
Raise app domain unhandled exception
Yeah.
event. And again, there's only 3 callers, so we don't care if it's 400 characters long.
Or, I'm not sure how I feel about what I'm about to say, but or put it on app domain. Yeah.
I didn't hear a heart attack, which means Jan must not be on the call. So if we just shove app domain in the middle, here's the name.
That works for me.
I don't
The
hear vomiting.
ambiguity- The app, it was ambiguous enough, and it did. There was some confusion when I first proposed what I did.
I don't know what it is about the in-case clone of the MS Ergo, but my right hand often ends up in the wrong position. Alright. Otherwise, it is a very comfortable keyboard. All right, we happy? Enough?
Happy.
Happy enough. Clicky, clicky, clicky. Badoop. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you all.
All right. Hybrid cache, a span-based fetch, number 112866. Are you with us, Mark?
Yep, I'm here. So this is a performance-related proposal, and the key, actually, just on that page you're on there, the short version of this is if you see those two get or create async APIs, which are the second and third APIs in that API proposal, but those already exist taking string as the parameter. So the heart of this proposal is to add new overloads for this get or create async API that takes the ref default interpolated string handler as the parameter. This is to exploit Roslin's capability to basically pass those in without allocating a string with no change to the calling syntax. So existing code that uses hybrid cache using interpolated strings as keys, which is the documented kind of and proposed highly suggested approach, will magically switch over to using the new approach. Underpinning this, we already have changes to several other parts of the in .NET 10 to allow us to fetch out the .text and access the .clear, which are used in the code shown, and also into the memory cache, which we're using as the kind of the L1 in memory thing in hybrid cache. So the whole point of this is that for cache hits on hybrid cache, which is obviously the scenario you aim for in a cache, there will be no allocations. There won't be. We're doing some work here to avoid all the. We won't have the string. We won't have the async box. We won't have anything until we actually decide we haven't got the value locally, and we need to actually go and do some real work to go and get it. So that's what the change is about. It's really just to add these two new ref overloads. It's a bit more complicated because default interpolated string handler is by its very nature a relatively dangerous API. I'm proposing not to make that the virtual version that anybody would need to override to implement it, because if they get it wrong, there's a chance of incorrect use of the kind of the buffered the pooled buffers. So instead, the proposal is to have this third new API, which is the top one there, the protected virtual, which that one takes the span, and the two proposed implementations in the base class deal with safely getting that span out in a way that doesn't impact anyone. And obviously, the default implementation, because this is the abstract base type is in abstractions, we have a concrete implementation in extensions and in a third-party Fusion cache library. So the idea here, obviously, is that if we haven't overridden it, then we just use toString, and it just uses the exact same code path as we have today using strings. So there's everything continues to work if the implementation doesn't support it yet. That's the gist of the proposal. Everything else there is just longhand for the same.
I'm curious about the top one only being protected. Are there no scenarios where someone would want to, like they already have a span and they'd want to use that as the key? Or you would say, okay, well, in that maybe rare case, use an interpolated string that just takes the span as the sole parameter? Or like, why protected rather than public effectively?
That is an interesting question. One thing that would concern me there is if somebody if they had a string and then started passing that in as the span, because then if we do need to go down to L2, we're going to have to create the string from the span, so we're going to end up with two strings.
Right.
But maybe that's a bit of an artificial concern. I guess the whole point of hybrid cache is to provide a simplified API. Starting to have them start passing in spans probably goes beyond that. At that point, I'd probably say if you want that kind of performance, maybe access the interpolated string handler yourself if you know what you're doing. But I'm open. I'm not happy. I don't want to die on that hill. If you think it has value with
No,
the
it
span
was a
version.
question. I mean, it's pretty common for us to expose span-based APIs. So, but neither
other
here nor
co-
there. If we don't think it's a common thing, or if we think like the 99% cases are handled by string plus interpolated strings, then this sounds fine.
I think
Also,
that's certainly
like
the high case. Sorry.
allocating the string in the L2 case, is it really that bad? Like, presumably,
No.
if you're using the span overload, it's because like you know it's not
You're
lazy,
expecting
right?
hits.
Like you were gonna have to create a string otherwise. Like,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, as
Unless
long
you
as
accidentally ended up with.
I
a
mean,
span.
unless you messed up, you're right. Yeah, it automatically converts.
right. Well, if this is a perfect overload except for string versus read-only span of char of the existing abstract method, then anyone with a string will call the string one, and anyone who already has typed as a span, what they would have to do right now is to string it because they can't turn a span into a string handler. So exposing the span one seems like it lets people who are already doing I wanted to trim a thing off of, or take a piece out of the middle of this string, so I want to pass a slice instead of a substring. It empowers them without actually having real cost.
Happy to do that. It would actually, for consistency, it would actually need to be a pair of methods, because we've got the because there's a callback. We actually have a pair. So there's a version that takes basically a T state, that is then passed in as an additional parameter. So I would need to add a fourth method, to the set there, but that's totally doable.
Was the T state never going to be useful to potential overriders of
Well,
this
the virtual
span
has
overload?
it.
They're
Oh.
forced to when they're overriding it.
Got it.
It looks like there's a color
I see what
convenience
you're
simpler
saying.
version. Yeah.
What does
Yes.
the
Okay.
sorry? Can you go back to your sketched implementation? What does the string interpolated handler that doesn't take?
So it calls
I
into
see.
that wrapped
it's-
callback cache
it's-
of T, which is
it's
it
marshalling
basically
it
unwraps
via-
the thing itself.
Interesting.
Steve, have we taken dish anywhere else? Being default interpolated string handler.
I've never heard it called dish.
I was just looking and
Um,
realized it acronyms to dish.
We got to
so-
do it. Yeah, that's
Uh,
good.
It is forevermore. It is now known as dish. I don't. Other than on like string.create, I think takes one. I don't think we've done it anywhere sort of outside of the core stuff. That doesn't mean we shouldn't. I mean, we added the text and clear methods to make that sort of feasible, so folks didn't have to keep writing their own. Let's look. I think we do it on.
Okay, so while
I
there's
mean,
not
technically, we could write a custom handler, but in reality, it would just be a struct that wraps a default interpolated string handler. So it's
Right.
like at that
Yeah.
point, what am I?
I think the only place we do it right now is string.create.
okay, but I think as you point out, we added the dot text and the clear
To
so that
make
we
this
could do
possible.
this. So it's not
Yeah.
while it is unprecedented, we did the prep work so that we could do this.
Right.
So,
And
right.
we sort of intended for that to be the precedent. The idea would be if all you need is just access to like a dynamically temporary span from interpolated arguments, you just use default interpolated string handler, and you don't have to write your own.
Or dish, as it's lovingly known.
Sorry, yes, dish. I apologize.
Okay, so made that protected.
So the way we've done that on the other bit similar to how it's done there. We made the non-T-state version non-overridable, so only the T-state, but so that called into the. But I can deal with those details on the thing if the. But that's.
I can't actually see what the. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, that's
What
it.
does the factory? What does the factory do?
That is the naming is hard. That's the operation to get hold of the data. If you, it's the kind of data fetch callback if it's a cache miss.
That's creating the T.
Yes.
It doesn't need the key.
Not in the current version, although that's an interesting question because that is something that's come up as a secondary set of API discussions for future versions of hybrid cache. It wasn't something I was going to try and put into this thing unless we desperately want to minimize the number of changes and complexity on that. But yeah, there has been a separate discussion of whether to put the key on there.
So that would change the signature of these, but presumably that'd be before .NET 10, so we wouldn't have like yet another overload.
Are you talking about adding a new set of 6 overloads, Mark, or are you talking about modifying the ones that have been added but aren't stable yet?
So currently it's a great question. If we do want to make any other API changes, because at the moment we've just got the 2 methods. Here we'd be adding 4, and then if we wanted to add another dimension, then it doubles again. So
then 6 becomes 12.
Yeah.
The 2 that we already have, those are stable or those are not yet shipped?
The 2 we have are shipped and stable. So that's the bottom 2, but with string instead of the dish.
And if we were to change the signature of the delegate here, it would no longer meet your requirements for someone is passing an interpolated string and they recompile and it just gets the new overload.
That is correct. So we probably need to duplicate there anyway. So it's. Yeah.
Why didn't you catch us on the first API review, Tobe? No, I'm just kidding.
I'm making a gesture with my hand, but you can't see it because my camera's on.
I'll make it for you.
Yes, that's the one. Thank you.
Okay, so do we want to do anything to this as a result of that thinking? Like
it's
like,
not a.
do these get only the new pattern, or do we expand this to 12?
Steven made the point that for the string to get actually used as a string and not a read-only span, we have to match the shipped signature.
Well, I'm also curious, like what is the workaround today? Does someone pass it through state? Is that how they would? Because like,
you have to allocate a new callback every time you try to add a key, I would assume, if your factory is dependent on the key.
Which doesn't work for spans or for interpolated string handler.
Yeah.
Allocating a new factory before the call to get or create.
What would you wrap that around?
Because
you'd be allocating a new one to close over something. What would you be closing over?
I see.
And currently this T-state doesn't say allows ref struct, which if it did, it would only be able to do it in the core builds, not the standard.
I guess I'm trying to understand, what does a factory even do? Is it literally like new T? Like what is it?
No, so it takes so in the simplest usage, it tends to be a local lambda with basically a capture of whatever inputs they needed. So it could be parameters from the method. If you're trying to hyper optimize that, then the idea
or the key,
is
right? Like you could close over the key. That's what I was trying to. Like, is that not possible?
You could do in the versions where the key is not a I guess.
Right.
Yeah, in the hyper optimized version, you pass in a state thing separately, which could be a value tuple of whatever you need, which could include. I think in this scenario, I guess where you need you need the key in that scenario. To be honest, it seems like a fairly rare use case because it's like a.
I mean, that's fair.
Very,
If it's not a common thing, I don't know the use cases, so I assumed that
Yeah.
key would be the main thing that you would need. But if it's not, then it's less of a big deal.
No, it tends to be the values that you have used to compose your key. So your key is usually, /customers /ID /region or whatever, whatever it is. But the thing that you actually care about is the ID and the region. So those go into your T state, usually as a name tuple, and then that you get that in your factory. So
to make it at least possible, though, presumably T state should be allows ref struct.
That'd have to be conditionally compiled to the runtimes that's valid, but
I think these APIs we're saying are only .NET 10, if I read the upfront material correctly.
they're .NET 9.
Oh, okay. Either way.
okay.
Wait, how are you implementing these on .NET 9 without text and clear?
So they're not on 9. Sorry. Yes, now I understand what you mean. Yes, the new APIs would be. I'm suggesting we would only do those .NET 10 onwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I
Well-
was thinking of the old stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, so if these need text and clear, they'd have to be
Yes.
whatever minimum thing targets them. These could be older, but not if we put.
But if older is only .NET,
But there's no
9,
benefit.
then we can still have T state be allows ref struct.
Fair enough. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
the docs say right now that hybrid cache is available, net standard and NetFX.
Oh, really?
Oh yes, they are. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah. So
Well,
the-
this could be allows ref struct.
It's late for me.
Yeah.
These could be allows ref struct when targeting net core.
I assume it's not a breaking change to add that.
Correct.
That's fine. We
Right.
can add that.
it just means that you get the joy of people who have something running or building only for net 9 or 10 or whatever, and then they expand to try and pick up some net standard, and it's like your state is not legal, and they're like, oh,
I'm not sure we can make that allows ref struct though, because in the case when you actually need the T state, it's because it's a cache miss, and then we are going to go to actual async code to go and check the L2, see whether we've got it in, and things like that. So before we actually end up invoking it, we would have had an await. So I'm not sure we can make it allows ref struct.
Okay. In that case, there is no way to get, even with new APIs, there'd be no way to get the key into the callback. But you're saying that's not a big deal.
I don't think that's a big deal. If we desperately needed that, we'd have to add deal with something that actually has more of a memory approach into, so it provides access to the key, but isn't the span directly, and they have to fetch it out.
I didn't even pay attention to the fact that this is async and taking a span. I feel like we say don't do that.
It's now
It's
a
an
lot easier
unusual
than it
case
used to
for
be.
reasons.
Yep. I mean,
It used to be you couldn't do it in an async method. Like you couldn't use spans in an async method at all. I mean, I'm sure you all know this, but I'm glad that now, as long as it doesn't cross the await,
yeah. I mean,
you can use it.
I assume a parameter would count as crossing an await boundary. I mean, technically, you could.
Well, that's what
not-
Mark was saying for L2. Yeah.
Well, this isn't actually it's awaitable, but it isn't actually async.
Right. It's because it in this, so it's not an async state machine thing because the default implementation is to string the key. But you've written implementations that are able to use
Yes.
the
but
key
but
effectively. I guess it's
The
you do
pure
a synchronous.
part only goes
yeah.
as far as L1.
So you do a synchronous thing on the span, and then when it fails, then you
Exactly.
to string it and continue.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean it is definitely weird, but I mean I guess guidelines exist to say when you're not weird, don't do weird things. But if you are weird, then you have to.
Whole dish of weird.
All right. Which in German means bathroom around table. All right. So, are we happy with what's on screen? I know we went back and forth on the key and key capturing. I guess we're saying this whole thing is net 10 or higher, greater, whatever.
Greater, I think that's.
I think technically these could be net standard, and only these have to be net 10 or greater. I don't know if we care.
Doesn't gain us anything though. If there's nothing special you can do, I'm not sure it's worth adding it.
Yeah, it would just be for the slice versus substring kind of problem. Or if somebody wants to, if they're composing it themselves, if they can compose it in a stack alloc versus a allocated string.
Yeah, but we can't even hit L1 with it as a span, so it really gains us very little.
Why wouldn't you be able to?
Because there's no API to to fetch values out of memory cache by span until
Okay.
on that standard or whatever.
Okay. This is the things that this would need to do to avoid the key.to string are themselves also new API. Okay. So not just
Yes.
the. Okay. Happy? It's old.
You go.
Mark. Bloop. Alrighty. Next up, add a string of letters starting with AVX 112586. Did you want to talk about this one today, Tanner?
Can
Do I
you
have
hear
time?
me?
Now I can.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we can do this one. It's fairly straightforward. Let me just make sure it's open on my screen here too. So the basic premise of this is that we already have AVX, BN, and I as an instruction set today. That largely just covers 32-bit integers. Intel has since exposed new instruction sets that cover both 8 and 16-bit versions, and these are known as AVX, BN, and I. Int 8 and int 16. So the names of the ISAs here correspondingly match the underlying architectural ISA names, as has been the convention, and they otherwise follow the existing pattern and naming convention and parameter ordering that we have for the other multiply, whitening, and add instructions that these functionally operate as.
Is there... So these are all existing names, just new data types to represent the fact that it's operating on bytes?
Correct. Taking in bytes, doing a multiplication between them as signed or unsigned widening them to the full type, and then adding with the addend and saturating to int max value or int min value if it overflows. And then the ones that don't have saturate, they don't saturate, they just overflow as expected.
I'm just glancing at shape, just making sure this one is intentionally asymmetric. You have signed, signed, unsigned, unsigned, but then there's only one direction of combining signed and unsigned.
Correct. So if you scroll to the left just a little bit, you'll note that there's the instruction names there. So there's BP, DP, B, which basically it's saying it's doing a dot product of bytes. And then the SS stands for signed, signed. The SU stands for signed, unsigned. The UU stands for unsigned, unsigned. So the first one takes in two signed, produces a signed result. The second one takes in a signed and an unsigned, producing a signed result. But it allows you to take that, and this functions correctly because of the widening part of multiplication. So even though it's taking in two 8-bit integers, where one is signed and one is unsigned, it's going to compute the correct widened 16-bit result from that. Technically, actually 32-bit result, but two 8-bit integers can't produce more than a 16-bit result for a multiplication. So, but that's why it's signed, unsigned there.
Okay, and let's assume for the moment that the math works out that you can flip the order. Have we added convenience overloads like that in the past, or are we just saying the underlying thing once signed on the left, so thou shalt put signed on the left?
Yeah, we've just said match what the underlying instruction has. For the platform-specific intrinsics, we try and avoid convenience overloads to avoid confusion. We've done that for the cross-platform intrinsics, but we don't have such things for this case.
Okay.
We just want to avoid the unnecessary API bloat and other things, and multiplication is commutative, so people doing math should know they can just swap left and right there if they're working with something this advanced.
Yep. My instinct said it should be, but based on saturation principles, etc., I was like, I don't know. It might be different.
Yeah, in this case, the saturation is happening with the addition after the widening, so it's not an issue.
All right. Any feedback on AVX's cousin Vinny?
Did you get both of the groups there?
Well, you got to make life hard for me.
Sorry.
AKA no. But fixing that. Same namespace. Okay.
Yeah, same namespace, same shape, just taking short and U short instead of byte and S byte.
Now let's hunt for the syntax error. All right. And v512 is the name we've used previously.
Yeah.
Okay. And it doesn't need its own nested type.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Tanner. I like easy ones. All right. Claims identity to perform case-sensitive comparison 113562. I think there's a whole host of people, so whoever wants to talk about it.
Hi, this is Peter. I'll start.
Where's the proposal?
Yep, that's the one. So
Oh, so
I'm from the
this constructor, these and these new members.
mostly just the constructor. That would be the main proposal.
That's the only new public API, right? Like, I mean, it changes how the other stuff is implemented, but is there anything else that's actually like a new member?
So the constructor would be the new public API, yeah, as a new
Okay.
member.
Because it says it's adding overloads.
So that would be an alternative if you want to add it. But if we do add a public constructor with any overload, then I think the method overloads would not be needed.
Okay. Jeff, you didn't make this look like all other proposals. You shouldn't have marked it ready. All right.
Oh, we need a ping, Jeff. Oh, you said. Okay, we're here.
I'm here.
I
Thanks.
just see. Okay, cool.
Oh, I was giving you guff, Jeff,
Thanks.
because this doesn't look like other proposals. I'm having to do work to get it in line with a proposal shape.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, at a high level, we're trying to add, I don't know if any preamble was already given, but we want to add an overload here that gives us better security by default while not breaking existing customers of the existing method, existing constructor, so that we can be handle casing correctly. And Peter, if you don't mind, I'll let you talk through the details on this and what you folks have seen. I know you had a derived type that a lot of customers have used successfully. Yeah, mind if I hand off to you to go to the technical?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so
Thank you.
in a nutshell, so basically claims identity is case insensitive since it's a more of a general type. In certain scenarios, in say identity model binaries, when we validate tokens like a JSON Web Token, that treats claim names as case sensitive. And so when we create the claims identity, there could be scenarios where there are multiple claims that only differ in the casing in the claim name. And currently, from the user perspective, when they use methods like all the find methods, it may be inconsistent in which claim they will get based on which case. So this makes it more obvious from a user perspective if there's a constructor that if we create a case-sensitive claims identity, that all the operations will be case-sensitive on the name, on the claim name. We did create in identity model a type called case-sensitive claims identity, and all it does, it just overrides those three methods, the find all, find first, and has claim, and it adds the logic of just comparing on the case-sensitive claim name along with the value. And we use that in our, when we create a claims identity, after we validate the token. And so currently, those three methods, they do have the parameters that accept predicates. So the user can search in a case-sensitive manner. But I think if we add a constructor, it's a bit more explicit and more clear to the user of which kind of type of sensitivity the claims identity is.
Yeah, I think the new constructor is pure goodness. I know there's some talk about like changing default behavior. I think it's probably safest to not do that in a core type. We can consider maybe using this constructor in more places in ASP.NET Core. And as you pointed out, when we're using like JotBearer or IDC, we're already using identity model, which does this. So it's not a big change there.
So this is proposing adding one constructor as a public constructor. But this type has constructors out the wazoo. Should they not all be gaining? I mean, modulo the serialization one. Should they not all be gaining a string comparison? The other way that would make sense to me is if the new constructor was protected and it's suggesting that the derived type should be handling all the rest of the stuff that comes out of these constructor parameters. But I guess I'm just surprised that it's extremely asymmetrical.
That's a good point. Are all those settable? I'm actually not sure. But you're right. Normally you would use a lot of those other parameters.
Yeah, I think we would need to add to every constructor that exists now.
Like Artesian explosion.
Yeah. I mean, we can avoid doubling it by a clever application of default parameters, arguments. I never remember which way the language thinks of them here.
Maybe there's just a ton of overloads already. To your point, we could only make it the longest overload, but ideally you want this to be kind of easy.
Yeah, I mean, we can add if we think that there's value in this shape, we can do this shape and the longest one.
Could. And then are you suggesting like adding default values to the longest one or something? That might.
I think that's all it's
create ambiguities.
doing. I don't think it looks like everybody's just forwarding values or null.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that's casting, which might just be getting past the fact that there are too many constructors. So it should be possible. Where'd my notes go? Notes. Wait, what is string comparison? Is that the enum? It is the enum. Yay. That just means it gets good defaults. Well, actually, it gets the default you don't want.
But we can change it, right? Yeah.
Well, because matching what the existing behavior would be.
Right. No, that's right.
That's
what we should do.
Is this?
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, we discussed changing the default behavior and the type straight up, but we do think it's safer to opt in. But we could do it at like the framework level too, ASP.NET Core and stuff.
So, hey, missed one. The new line's added value.
And then if ever there was like an overload without default values, which I don't think any of the overloads take default values today, thankfully, there should be no ambiguity, hopefully.
I just scrolled through them. Let there be witnesses. Where did the constructor start? So no defaults, because I don't think we've touched this since we added defaults to the language.
That's telling you something.
Like I feel like this type was invented for Net Framework 3.5 and hasn't been touched since.
When were defaults added? Like 4 or 5? been around as long as I can remember, pretty much.
Yeah, I want to say 4 or 5 or
Okay.
thereabouts. Actually, claims identity might be from 2.
Yeah, I believe that.
I remember there was, because I remember dealing with complications of Windows identity changing to be a claims identity. And I'm old, so it might be 2.
Right, like old ASP.NET Framework used to use iIdentity as like its core user type, and now we just use claims identity because everything's a claims identity in ASP.NET Core. But yeah, you can definitely see some legacy of that. Or rather, yeah, iClaims or iPrinciple, I guess it was, and versus claims principle, but same idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, if the alternative proposal was adding overloads to the 3 lookup methods, I mean that is also possible. It just feels clunkier, and especially because these are virtual, which means we'd have virtual storms.
I agree. I think if we can get away with it, we should try adding one constructor. But I do like that you don't have to derive from the class to use it, because like you could already do that with enough work.
Yeah, I'm just because like while looking at it, seeing them virtual, I started with but what if someone passes? I want ordinal, but the derive type does ignore case anyway. It's like, well, that's because that's the derive type's fault. It shouldn't have let you pass that through to the constructor if it wasn't going to respect it. So if you're instantiating this directly, it'll work right, and if it's being derived and somebody's overriding these methods, they won't take a comparison currently, and if they do take a comparison, they should deal with that appropriately. So
Sounds good.
I think it is empowering without being confusing. What would be confusing is if we expose it as a property to tell you what the comparison is, because then, if you have a derived type, they wouldn't have known about it. Well, actually, yeah, that would be what's confusing. A derived type would tell you, I'm ignore case, but the whole reason they overrode was to be ordinal. So we should not expose it as a property, I think.
I'm fine with that. If there's a good use case, we could add it later, presumably. Yeah, most I could see is some sort of like runtime security validation that like you had configured the right option or something, but it's probably better done with like other means.
Chat has, should it be an equality comparer instead of the string comparison enum, and shouldn't the case sensitivity be determined by the caller, so it should be overloads on the find methods?
No and no. I mean, the types are strings, so I think string comparison's fine. And like, yeah, I don't see what's so important about controlling it on a per call basis, and I don't want a bunch of overloads.
Peter, do you have any scenarios where controlling on the per call for those method overloads was necessary?
No, not really. I think if you could use the predicates overloads if you want the per call.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Mostly it's, yeah, the whole claims identity should be either case sensitive or not.
What do you mean predicate overloads?
The find all, find first has claim has a overload detects a predicate
Of
where
claim.
Okay. I mean, I think claims is also just a exposed collection, so you can do whatever you
all
want in
sorts
there.
of options.
This is
Yeah.
this is an extremely overly sherry type where I think like everything is virtual.
Yep.
This is
I mean, that's why people like it. That's why we've been able to do the case sensitive checks to this point. But yeah,
if I wanted an example of how not to design a type, this is probably my best example. So.
not stream. Sorry, Steve. No, I'm just kidding.
Stream has sadly just had to deal with two major evolutions of how we think of
Yeah, APM.
things. Yeah.
You know, span memory. Yeah, no, I know it's bad.
Stream sucks, but that's because of upgrades. This was designed wrong.
You're gonna stop laughing the next time we have to update pipelines as well, Stefan.
I know.
Yeah. Anything that you're ever happy with is a temporary illusion. It will eventually come back and bite you. All right.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm apparently cynical today. But when we finally get around to doing PQC, they're perfect. All right. Okay, so we added two constructors and said no property because it's confusing. We said we don't need the complicated equality comparers or the per method call and their workarounds. So this seems like the right shape to me. Does anyone have other feedback? Or feel that there's something I should write in the notes that I didn't?
Dip it.
Peter, does this feel like this is going to meet your needs, you think?
I'll have to verify which overloads we use, but I think at the very base level, yes.
I apologize if this was discussed and I missed it. I had to tune out for a minute. This makes sense even with current culture and like issues that could arise if claims were created where culture had different meaning.
I don't think we take don't take different cultures into account currently. It's just same culture.
Well, but
Right,
if
like
you
the
pass
current
string
default
comparison,
behavior.
yeah,
Oh,
but
sorry.
if someone passes string comparison dot current culture, is everything going to be okay security wise?
Probably not.
Interesting. So is the suggestion just to take a bool or something? Just like
Or
in
to
our case,
to block anything other than ordinal and ordinal in our case until we understand the ramifications.
yeah, that seems safe. Or
Bless you, Jeremy.
Sorry about that. And I couldn't do a good block because there's a boom in front of my face.
I don't know what problems might exist, but I do know that we get issues all the time of people expecting things to compare equally and they're not equal, or vice versa because of culture issues, and having that explicitly in a domain that's around validating claims makes me a little nervous.
yeah, we should just allow all the enum values that Brian mentioned in culture. I think that's fair.
Okay. It's a question of why do we need the first constructor given the second one, and the answer is just convenience. calling this one, somebody would have to write string comparison colon whatever they want if they wanted nothing else. And since the primary suggestion was to add just this constructor, I assume they're asserting that there are cases that it's the only thing they want to specify.
The only thing they want to specify, and it's common for that to be done.
That's what I'm looking at. Like, is it? Because like that's not the way I normally use it. But like, yeah, I mean, you can add claims and stuff. Typically, you need to at least set an authentication scheme for it to be considered authenticated, right? Or an authentication type. So like, I honestly don't know if that constructor would be used much. And given that everything else has defaults, like, wouldn't that first constructor kind of be redundant?
It would.
Like, you could just pass that in.
I mean, we
I
could
guess
just
it's for
do the
email
last.
sense.
So it would.
Yeah.
It's just down to if you get to say, base of. You'd have to write more words than that, but versus. I can copy things. I don't have to write them.
Yeah, I would just add the one constructor. I think 99.9% of people at least want to set an authentication type, which I don't think is settable any other way other than a constructor.
Yeah. So the one argument call is the difference here. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the second one would be more useful because there are certain scenarios where we pass just identity or just the claims. So it's more stuff.
And like, you almost always need to pass an authentication type. Otherwise, is authenticated will be false.
all right. So the defaulted one only. If it turns out that there are common calling patterns of like just these two, then we can always add convenience overloads in the future. Nein, Frederick, das ist nicht gut. Straße, that's stupid. Spell it the Swiss way.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm enjoying that I speak German. Ein bisschen. Alright, anything else?
Looks
Sold.
good to me.
Bloop.
Peter, thanks for putting this in place for us.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, people who spoke on that one. Alright. Add APIs to read the assembly name info of an assembly file. 113749. Do we have Steve Harder here? Do we have anybody else who wants to speak about it? / see if he can be summoned in? Can somebody speak to changing unsafe as pointer to ref read only?
Yeah, I can.
All right. Well, then this one.
Yeah, so if you'll recall, 1 or 2 C# releases ago, we got ref read only in addition to in, which basically ensures that the that the input is a biref, so it's an L value and not just an R value, so it's not a temporary. There's an actual concrete location for it, so you can't pass in like a literal or anything. And when that happened, we went and changed several APIs where it made sense to take ref read only instead of ref or in. For as pointer in particular, this is an already unsafe operation. And so the request is that we change it to take ref read only instead of ref because that avoids the need for the second call. So you don't have to do as pointer t unsafe dot as ref with the read only reference. You can just pass in the read only reference directly. And since it's returning a pointer, there's no concern about losing the fact that it was immutable because you're converting to something where that concept doesn't exist already. So it just removes the amount of nesting, improves the legibility and other considerations. And there's a particular case for WinRT's COM support where it benefits them. And so that's why Sergio opened the issue and got the request up.
So the application of read-only on the parameter that will limit what the method can do, but it doesn't. This is enabling on the caller side and restricting on the callee, so it's not a breaking change?
It's not a source breaking change to go from ref to ref read only. That was explicit in the language feature so that such changes could be made. For example, volatile.read historically took a ref because it was exposed in .NET Framework 2.0 or 1.0 back before in even existed. And so part of the language feature was explicitly allowing the migration from ref to in and from ref to ref read only without it being binary breaking and without it being source breaking.
Okay, and there aren't any mod recs or mod ops or anything weird that come along with it. I mean, this is using a void star, so it's nobody who's sensitive to those would matter anyway. But okay, I'm just loading it in my brain for the future.
Yeah, there's been requests that we also make changes like this for other APIs like unsafe.add. But the issue there is that they take in a ref and they return a ref. And so with such an API, theoretically, we could take in ref read only and return a ref. And so it implicitly gives that mutability stripping, or the immutability stripping, and removing the nesting. But because that one has some level of because refs can actually track the immutability, we've not wanted to make that change there. And so the unsafe pointer being the pointer returning is the one where it seems more okay. Just to help clarify on the other bit, the other APIs and why we're not doing it for them.
Fair enough. Any other feedback? Sold. Okay. And well, Theo has offered to lead the discussion on this over YouTube chat. I think we'll wait for a sponsor. So, 20 minutes left, taking bids.
We could do the WebSocket one halfway down the page.
All right. 111217.
So with Socket, you can wrap it in a network stream and then treat it like a stream. With WebSocket, there's no equivalent. People have asked for an equivalent, but there isn't one, and that's what this is proposing. Basically, a stream wrapping a WebSocket. So the API is just derived from stream with a constructor that accepts the WebSocket, and then a Boolean about whether dispose should close the WebSocket or not. But the devil is in the details. There are, I think, two relevant things to consider. The first is using network stream as a basis. A network stream has a parameter called ownSocket that defaults to false. It's, as far as I can tell, the only public API we have that uses that naming and that polarity. Everything else is leave open. So deflate stream, gzip stream, stream reader, they all have a leave open parameter that defaults to false, which means that it would be, ownership is transferred by default, whereas network stream does not transfer ownership by default. The way this is proposed right now, it matches network stream, but it seems, even though it's closest to that in sort of domain, it seems like it would actually be better to map to what we do mostly elsewhere in .NET. The other question is around having a constructor at all, and whether it would instead be better for it to be factory methods. In particular, there's another use case that's been discussed in that WebSockets support the notion of messages, where you can have multiple byte-based payloads getting sent, but they can all have a flag in them that's basically end of message false, and then at some point end of message is true, and you kind of treat all of those bytes as a single message split across multiple packets. There was a suggestion that you might want to use a WebSocket stream not to own the whole lifetime of the WebSocket, but to be for a specific message. And so you might want to create a WebSocket stream where when you dispose it, rather than disposing the WebSocket, it's actually just sending an addition. All the messages that get sent from end of the stream are all end of message false instead of true. And when you dispose the stream, it basically sends a final message that is end of message true. And if we wanted to add something like that, I'm not sure how we would do it with a constructor. We would probably need some sort of factory method to specify that's the behavior you wanted. Those are the open questions that I had. Stefan.
Yeah, so I agree with the polarity matching network stream. Like, I understand that there are a lot of like stream-based APIs where they they take ownership of the thing passed in. But I think for network stuff, like because of the scenarios you talk about, like we're controlling part of a message or something, it makes sense. But like, I guess that was the other part of it. So like when you do, okay, I have a bunch of questions. I guess let's start with the easy one. Why did you move away from the as stream proposal and move to a constructor?
Just because it's mirroring how network stream does it.
Okay. I like the discoverability of as stream, but the other kind of big thing is, to your point about messages, is this going to create messages, or is this only like a single message within a binary WebSocket? And does it support text WebSockets?
So the only difference between text and binary really is whether validation happens. And the validation happens inside of the WebSocket itself. So I think it would ignore whether it was text or binary, but anything written would be binary.
But so would it not insert any like framing for you? Like
I think every message you wrote would be a binary complete message.
I see. So like every call to write async or whatever, that array or buffer or whatever would be its own message.
At least in this, what I have here. But for the second question, if you wanted to create one of these where the whole stream was focused on a specific message, then that would not be the case. Then every write would be explicitly not the end of the message, and when you disposed the stream, it would send an end of message.
It's interesting. I think that's probably one of the big reasons we've avoided this before, right? Is because it doesn't give you that clean control over the framing.
If you want clean control over the framing, you use WebSocket.
Obviously. And sometimes it doesn't matter, right? Because like sometimes the client's just going to concatenate all the messages anyway. I think streaming within a message isn't that useful because I don't think you could. I mean, at least from JavaScript, you wouldn't be able to read it. Like, can you read a partial message with even the C# WebSocket type? I don't know.
Can you read a partial message? I mean, I don't know what you mean by that.
Like a partial frame.
I mean, you can read,
Yeah.
and it'll give you back bytes, and it'll say end of message is false until.
Right. Yeah, I remember. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, it's just been a little time since I've used the WebSocket API.
Yeah. So I feel that most of our stream types, aside from memory stream where you can't tell the difference, use buffering to avoid chatter, but you would say that this would be every call to write is going to send its own.
Very few of our streams have built-in buffering. The only one besides memory stream that is a buffer, which so I think that's kind of exempt, is file stream, and even there you're able to disable the buffer. Everything else
backed by pipelines. So like most streams in the ASP.NET Core are buffered, but yeah.
Sure, but that's because you're mapping it to something else that is inherently a different mode of operation.
Right. The point is, at least with ASP.NET Core streams, you can do a bunch of small writes without it necessarily creating like a bunch of like, you know, HTTP2 messages or HTTP11 chunks. Like, it's not chatty necessarily.
Sure. But with streams in general, you wrap. That's why buffered stream exists. Is you wrap a deflate stream, a network stream, a pipe stream, a whatever in a buffered stream, and then
that's true.
You get the buffer from there.
Fair, I guess. I'm probably
the fact that file stream has it built in is kind of problematic.
Yeah. Well, I remember TAing a intro CS course and explicitly pointing out to people that the network stream doesn't send data until you call flush, but that course was in Java, so.
Yeah, that's not the case for .NET. Network stream.write is just socket.write. It's just a straight pass-through.
Okay. Fair enough then. So what if you have a WebSocket stream in total control mode? So you say, you know, new WebSocket stream of WebSocket.open whatever. Where does end of message manifest? Nowhere?
Every write.
No, sorry, if you're reading.
Depends on what the sender sent.
No, but I mean, assuming that reading is relevant, if you say new WebSocket stream of open a WebSocket and the sender sends end of message, does that close the stream or do you just ignore it, or is there a Boolean?
End of message is not about WebSocket lifetime. It's just there's a series of bytes on the wire that are intermixed with markers. That's basically like, you know, like if I send you 100 bytes, but I split that into 4 pieces. So I sent you 25 bytes, end of message false, 25 bytes, end of message false, 25 bytes, end of message false, 25 bytes, end of message true. I can do that again immediately after. It's just a marker on each packet.
Right.
And
so my question is, how does
from the stream perspective, that marker just isn't surfaced.
Right. So there's no, somebody using it in read mode, not in sort of create message, that they'll lose that data.
If it exists, yeah. This is focused on primarily on situations where you don't care. Like you're using a WebSocket for a never-ending stream of audio data.
Sure. You're pointing out things on the writes looking at this data, so I'm just asking how do the reads handle that data.
The writes is just, I'm just like, the fact that it marks things as end of message is sort of it could do the other thing too. It could also say not end of message and it wouldn't matter.
Does the JavaScript API allow reading partial messages?
I don't know.
I'm not sure that it does. That would be the reason that it might matter.
To set it to true,
but, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
so that at least JS could read it.
Yeah, and the reading on this, I guess, would be buffered because it has to. The WebSocket gave you a kilobyte and you asked for 2 bytes, so I need to hold the rest until you call read again.
Well, no, you whatever buffer you pass into read is what gets passed to WebSocket.receive. There might be buffering happening under the covers in the WebSocket's socket.
Okay. Fair enough.
Or in the WebSocket itself, but not in this stream. Right, you just walk up to the WebSocket and say, "Give me here's a buffer. Please read into this buffer."
So does WebSocket not manifest the end of message state on read?
It does. If it received a 100-byte message and you ask for 25 bytes, it manufactures a frame that says it's end of message false.
Okay. Maybe it's obvious if you're using it.
So you go to WebSocket and you say receive, you give it a buffer, and it gives you back a struct that basically says how many bytes were read and what's at the end of the message.
Okay, and so the read from the stream would call this and then ignore any superfluous data.
Right.
So you're throwing away the message type and the end of message.
Right. To your question, Stefan, about why a separate type rather than as stream, I think that also contributes here, which is it's not full fidelity of the data, right? It's not like just a different representation. There's opinions here about what's being surfaced. Having it as a separate type sort of highlights that it's not one-to-one with the WebSocket.
Yeah, I like it more now, thinking about the troubles. Like, initially I'm like, yeah, we could make it, like, it doesn't have to return stream as stream. It could return WebSocket stream if we wanted to add special properties to it. But to your point, like, yeah, I don't necessarily want it to be too discoverable anymore. Thinking of that. Like, there are use cases, but it's not just like, a trivial translation as like network stream with socket or something.
I mean, even network stream loses data. Like every packet that you read from a socket has various flags that you can read and that are set on it, and those aren't surfaced, but regardless.
Yeah, I mean, that's abstractions for you. The OS is hiding tons of stuff about the TCP messages and the packets and so forth.
All right, and so Stefan, you believe that it should use the owns paradigm instead of the leave open paradigm?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that it should take over ownership by default.
Yeah, then I would have it match network stream, which is a nice story on its own. It would definitely be weird to have it be leave open true, but that would be another inconsistency that we don't do that anywhere else either.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. So what would create message do in read? That if it saw end of message true, it just says end of stream?
It wouldn't. It would create something that was write only.
Okay.
And what would the namespace for this be?
I think it would live right next to WebSocket, I think. There's a systemnet WebSockets. Sorry, I should have added that. I forgot to include that.
I figured. Worth calling out. Yeah, I'm fine with the namespace. I don't think we have to hide it. But yeah, I'm now with you as far as not making it a method.
As a counterexample to the whole owns thing, there's an existing API, WebSocket create from stream, which is the other direction, which does take ownership.
So what I see, right, is like when you create a WebSocket from the stream, the WebSocket, I mean, it is a little bit like that controls the entire thing. Like that's the fullest fidelity thing almost in a way. Whereas like with WebSocket stream, you could conceive of using it more for like a partial session. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that method also doesn't have an option to stop it from taking ownership.
Oh, that's interesting. But yeah,
Even with network stream, I would argue that most uses where you forget to set like leave open false or like owns or whatever the transfer ownership is are mistakes in a bunch of cases.
not in
Like if you're-
Kestrel. But yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say for me, every stream I ever use is always in a using, and anything that went into it is in a using, so I never care what the status is. I assume it doesn't take ownership because it shouldn't, because ownership's a hard problem.
Yeah, it's like okay, and I realize like we're not in DI land, but like as a general rule in DI, you don't dispose your constructor dependencies, and this isn't that. I understand different patterns, different like whatever, but you know, network stream follows this pattern. I think it's fine.
Yep. So, given the idea of the message one and it sounding like a thing that WebSocket is sort of intentionally designed to do, to me the factory methods instead of the constructor seems better, because then we don't get the bool do you mean for a message and then the bool for do you mean owning, and create message is I don't own it because I'm only sending one message.
Right.
Okay, and it's on WebSocket stream, not WebSocket. So like I think that's fine.
That's at least where I'd put it. I could see from WebSocket you want create stream and create message stream. That would also be fine as an
I think
instance
they-
thing.
There are enough use cases. Like if you grep.app around the internets, there's a good number of people that have implemented this on their own, but not enough that I want it, I think, promoted to be in everyone's face. I mean, WebSocket's surface area is pretty minimal. It's basically send, receive, and close. So I'm not sure I want to promote this to be something that shows up, you dot off it and you see stream. But I think it is important enough that it's available so that someone doesn't have to write all the boilerplate themselves. I also don't know that we need the create message thing now. I can talk with Miha and Natalia about it, but I just want to make sure we were set up to be able to add it later.
Sure. I mean,
One thing I like about create message is it clarifies a little bit that create is more than one message. Like just the fact that are two, like would get me as a consumer thinking about it, which I think is actually helpful from an API design perspective.
All right, that's fair. I mean, it's trivial to add.
Yeah.
I was gonna say approving it now doesn't mean you have to add it now, but to hit Stefan's value add point there, you would have to. Does it really? And then I guess I took those names out of the suggestion. They also seem like reasonable names to me. But you know,
Yeah, the only thing I create message, it could be like create for message, or create, yeah, just questioning my own naming. Create message maybe suggests that it's returning something called a message.
yeah. I mean, we can go the MIME route. We can call it create multi-part message.
No thanks.
I think I saw Miha join.
Yeah, he was talking.
Fair enough. Well, just you said talk with Miha, and so
No,
then,
I meant about whether to actually merge that or not.
and so then it's just do we have other suggestions for the name of create message? So I think create for message. Create long message is probably you're matching your intent, but it's not necessarily long. So
Yeah. Create message is probably fine.
create. It's weird because what you really want is to say is you're creating a single message. So like create single message. But you're creating the single message using multiple or probably multiple frames.
I think I would probably go with create for message because in English I would say I'm creating a WebSocket stream for a message.
Okay.
So I guess, yeah, I'm mostly thinking about this from like writing a stream to the WebSocket. But as far as like reading the stream, would that like then read a single message and write a single message?
My
This is
thinking
getting
was
kinda weird.
My thinking was it would be write only.
Okay, yeah, I like that for the. Is that for both or just for the for message one?
Just for the message one.
Okay, yeah.
Do you think it needs to say write in its name?
I mean, the first time somebody tries to use it to read, it'll throw.
Yeah.
They'll get the can read false and learn not to call it. So.
I mean, we could make it work for reading as well. I think I don't see any reason we.
It's an odd
couldn't.
scenario though to assume that you'd want to read like one message and write one message with a stream.
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess you could do it in a loop. I guess you're reading arbitrarily length messages via something that consumes streams.
Maybe. I mean, it gives you the boundary information back for what it's worth.
Right.
Yeah, I mean the read mode makes sense to me. The stream moves into end of stream when it sees the end of message marker.
Yeah, we could.
The problem is it's duplex. The messages aren't 1-to-1, so the loop would be hard to write.
The loop would be hard to write.
Right, like you would want separate read and write streams if you were going to write a loop that was processing each, right? Because you're not going to, like the stream for the read is not going to end for the stream for the write, most likely, if you're doing it like per message.
That's true. It is strange. You kind of want it to. I mean, from that perspective, create for message could take a direction.
Right. Yeah, create reader for message, create writer for message, something like that would be more useful.
Yeah. So chat suggested create message writer.
Create message reader.
And then you could also have create message reader.
Do we have this website? I don't remember. Does WebSocket already have any notion of limiting direction? I don't think it does.
I don't think so. I mean, there's nothing stopping us from splitting the streams into like, simplex instead of full duplex streams or whatever the terminology is.
No. I was just wondering if instead of create message writer, create message reader, it would be like create for message WebSocket, comma, the equivalent of file direction or file, whatever that's called. But
this represents both sides of the WebSocket too, right? So it's a little. Yeah.
WebSocket represents.
And potentially WebSocket stream.
For the first overload, yes. The first
for all
overload
of
is
them.
duplex.
Oh yeah, the first overload's duplex, and the next two are simplex. But the point is, like, both all these APIs could be used from the client or server.
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it was created for. I mean, the only thing server versus client matters with WebSocket is the beginning and end of the protocol.
Right.
Actually, maybe even just the beginning of the protocol.
Yeah, pretty much. I would have to double check the shutdown. I would have to read the spec again.
I think it's just. I think it's mainly just the handshake. It might. You're right.
Yeah.
There might be a difference on things like how long to wait at shutdown.
There are subtle differences when you write frames of like some
For the
seed
mask.
padding. Yeah, mask. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's largely just state that was sent when the handshake was.
Right.
Yeah.
If we were to say that we don't block reading from these streams and we do return end of stream when we see an end of message, would the expected use case be that you just keep creating new and new streams all the time?
Yeah, you have to have the end of stream end of message if you have a message reader. I think for sure.
Yeah, I think create message reader would basically the resulting stream would be disposed would be EOF when you hit end of message, and you'd have to create a new stream. You'd have to call the method again to get the next one effectively.
Which I think is fine.
I guess they're small objects.
Right, and you don't have to use this, right? You can use WebSocket if you like really care about the framing, but yeah.
And again, as well, like we can also we don't have to add these now. I just want to make sure we're set. We can add these now if we like them, but I just want to make sure we're set up to be able to add them in the future. And I think the first overload is so far proven. I think we haven't really needed to change that. It's how do we represent the latter ones, but we can represent them as statics and just come up with the right names for them.
Yeah, I like create message reader, create message writer.
So the only thing that I'll point out on that is we have the type stream reader and stream writer, and this is creating streams and not readers and writers.
Yeah, we have like text reader, text writer, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But
I mean, we can say we don't care, or that is
It could be rather than create. It could be read message, write message.
So WebSocket stream dot read message.
Yeah.
And then people would expect that to like return.
Yeah.
Like I know it's static and stuff, but yeah, definitely people would expect that to return a buffer.
Yeah. All right. Create for reading one message.
I'm on like team doesn't care. It's on WebSocket stream.
Is this team doesn't care versus team Edward? Is that what?
You could, I mean, if you want to be really explicit, you could be like create message writable stream, create message readable stream, or something. But this is like I don't know. Create readable message stream, create writable message stream.
Because yeah, I mean the.
It's on stream, so you could do like create readable
like-
message, create writable message.
Because WebSocket stream dot write message of socket, like
It's sufficiently obscure that
Every-
you have to read the docs.
everyone who's looking at the code would figure it out by what it does on context, but just looking at it, you're like, well, I expect it's going to write a message, so where do I give it the message? It's like, well,
I like create writable message over write message. Like I get writable isn't a super common word, but it's not that bad. It's not. I don't think that's too tortured.
I was looking. I don't see anything like we have a ML data schema direction, and we have a quick abort direction, but otherwise everything that I can find that talks about reading versus writing is like file access rights.
Yeah, we have pipe direction in and out, but that's not applicable here.
Yeah, I mean,
I like them being different methods for the writable and readable streams, message streams. Like my vote would be create writable message, create readable message, or create message reader,
No,
create
or
message writer.
it could be.
Create writable message reader.
Create a message.
Like that's a-okay with me. I don't think that's too bad. No 4. The stream is the writable message or readable message.
Because yeah, I mean, I guess it's that it has an implicit suffix of stream that we just generally have the like. It's on a type that ends in stream. You know, it's stream because create writable message stream totally makes sense. And so maybe the answer is we should actually just write the word stream there.
We could also do that.
So we have create and create writable message stream. Because it's saying I'm not creating a message, I'm creating a message stream. Or a stree, comma, m.
We could even call it create stream. If we want to. Or create connection stream. Create socket stream. Yeah, it's fine.
So there are some weird things that happen, like if you say WebSocket stream.create on a WebSocket, then you say WebSocket stream.create writable message. You now have 2 streams plus the WebSocket that can start writing data in the middle and messing with your state. But I mean, that's really just don't do it.
That was already a problem. You pointed it out, right? Like you already had the WebSocket, so like this is already an issue. Like don't do it. Yeah.
Doctor, it hurts when I do this.
Yeah. I'm
You're holding it wrong.
I'm just thinking through the consequences of we have a duplex stream and then 2 unidirectional streams just because the duplex with state is sad. So, like, I think this looks fine. It's a bit chatty, but
It's
It could
okay.
be even chattier. Create
You know,
for writing one message.
No.
Create for
I like
reading
the
one
bottom
message.
3. I think, we're a little bit over. I think the final 3 is in a pretty good spot. And it's, as you always say, right? We could just do 1 and approve all 3 or whatever.
yeah. So I think the only question is if we like the stream suffix on the long ones, do we want the stream suffix on the short one?
I would say no.
So
It's fine.
So you're personally fine with the impedance mismatch between these factories.
I'm also I guess I'm not that picky. Like I'm also fine without the stream suffix on the per message ones, but I could see the argument for it being like a little like sounding weird without stream at the end for the latter ones. So I'm fine with keeping it.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those. It either needs a stream suffix or the for infix.
Yeah, I don't think it needs for because I would say the stream literally is the writable and readable message. It's not for it; it is it. But
I guess it'd be
create
create writable for message.
or just create writable message. Like,
Yeah.
and the stream is implied. Like the stream is the writable message. But yeah, it's fine.
All right, Steve, Miha, are you happy with this triplet?
I'm fine. The only thing I might do at this point is just take off the sealed or say we don't care because it's possible we would want to implement this with some derived types internally.
Shape looks fine to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Tobe has voluntarily unsealed a type.
It's
Uh,
not
but-
even virtual.
Yeah, but it has a private
stream
constructor.
stream is obviously
You
this.
can't-
Yeah.
It's got a private constructor, so that's the saving grace.
Wait, but I see.
I mean, you can
And
unseal
by
it later
private,
if
it'll
that's your
be
point.
Effectively internal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still not derivable externally.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. But what about the, yeah, dispatch tables and stuff. No, I'm just kidding. VLOOKUPs. No.
Clearly, create is not returning a new instance of WebSocket stream. It's returning sealed WebSocket stream so that the vtables are locked.
Yeah, we need to lock the vtables. This is important. Yeah. No. Anyway.
I'm making that gesture again.
All right. I think we're good. Pair, it's a set, it's a group. Triad. Triad's a good word. All right. Boom. Nope, I missed. And boop. Alrighty. So yeah, because just rehashing, because it seemed like there's confusion from the stream. The message thing is about WebSocket and the end of message bit. So the idea behind create writable message stream is every time you call write, it says end of message false, but then when you dispose the stream, it now says end of message true. And similarly for readable, is it will hit the end of stream state when it sees end of message true. And then that tells you you've moved on to the next message in the multi-message protocol. So this is about WebSocket specifically, not about streams in aggregate. It's very domain knowledge. All right. So with that, thanks for joining us. And we will see everyone at our same .NET time, our same .NET channel next week. Till then,
Well.
Auf Wiedersehen.